Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 97 of the Dynasty Junkies podcast, a proud member of the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network, the DAP Network, if you will. And we do it every time. It's a great Thursday night. We're going live on the YouTubes. You'll be listening to us in your ear holes in whatever format you want to on Apple and iTunes, all those, whatever they're called these days. You got Google Podcasts and Podbean, all those options. With me tonight is the co-host that is the newest on the show, technically. I've got the one and only Bobby Koch returning from retirement to help us out. How you doing tonight, Bobby?
It's not even technically. I am just the newest co-host.
That's right.
What you didn't see behind the scenes is that Andrew was hazing me a bit as the new guy, as well as the other host on the show. But I'm glad to be here. I did the draft show with the DAP Network, had way too much fun, and essentially decided I need to come back and do this more regularly. They were nice enough to ask me to be a host at least once a month. So looking forward to talking to these guys. And I feel like this is the right level of investment. I'm not talking every week, but you can hear me at least once a month. And if you don't want to hear me, then you can skip that month's episode and that'll be fine.
That's kind of our thinking too. It's like Bobby needs a place to vent. We need to let Bobby have somewhere he can come talk to the world. You know what I mean? So I'm glad we could have you on. I'm glad we could join you in our rotation here on the Junkies, where everybody's busy with life, and it's nice to have more options. So more opinions, more ideas. You're a junkie like the rest of us, Bobby. You're welcome, of course. Tonight, though, we've got
one
a terrific...
quick thing I will add before we introduce our guest, and I did want to do this, and I completely forgot. I advised Rocky and Dustin on the very first episode and iteration of this show. I listened to it and then gave them essentially live feedback. So it's weird now to essentially be hosting the show with them and with you, but I'm very glad to be here. And I'm going to steal your role here since I interrupted you and say also very glad to be on with our guest who I've followed for a long time on Twitter. I've listened to for a long time. I know you have too as well, Andrew. And our guest is Pat Fitzmaurice. Pat, we're so happy to have you on the pod.
Hey, Bobby and Andrew, thank you for having me on. It's feels like a good night. It's right on the eve of a nice long holiday weekend. And Bobby, I suspect you're being modest. I mean, you're talking about the people who might tune you out or the episodes that you're on. What about the Bobby files who are going to tune in to only the ones that you're on? I know there are people like that out there too. So
yeah,
don't be so modest.
I mean, I appreciate you giving a shout out to my mom, Pat. I'm sure will appreciate that as well.
Every download counts, Bobby. Every download counts. We'll take it. That's a good time. Well, again, Pat, thank you so much for coming on tonight. If people don't know who you are, you're on Twitter at Fitz_FF. You're the host of Fitz on Fantasy, how long have you been doing Fitz on Fantasy now?
Oh, man. 3.5 years, I think.
Okay. That sounds about right. Yeah, that's kind of when I started really diving in. And I remember finding your voice just very unique and different and kind of outside the box of what I used to hear about. So that was kind of a good time for me when I picked up your podcast. But you're doing a lot more than that now, right? You're on Fantasy Pros full time. What all do you do for Fantasy Pros? Maybe I'll ask you that instead of telling people. Let you tell me what's going on in your world of Fantasy Pros.
Oh, so technically I'm the managing editor of Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros. So there's a lot of managing and like article assignments and talent recruitment, which we're working on at Betting Pros, trying to find some writers since we have kind of a shortage, and just general, working with writers. There's like a coaching element to it, but then, also continuing to do content, articles, rankings. That sort
what
of thing.
Don't you do at this point, Pat? Geez, you're all over the place now.
Yeah, and I should also plug the Fantasy Pros Dynasty podcast, which I co-host along with Scott Bogman, who's just fantastic and like an encyclopedia of college football knowledge. Oh, yeah. Bogman is just insane with that, so that's good. He kind of carries me on the college stuff, so I needed him to do that this spring.
That's Pat's great. Also being a little modest here because in terms of accuracy experts, he always ranks towards the top of Fantasy Pros accuracy experts. And I will put this out there. I'm sure it'll make Pat feel embarrassed, but whenever I need to decide who to sit or start in a particular week, I honestly just look at where Pat has them ranked and then go, okay, that's the tiebreaker.
All right. Well, I mean, I'll feel good about that, Bobby, unless you show me your trophy case and it's all empty. So,
yeah.
No, I have one league, Pat, which will actually, never mind. That league's not a sit or start league, so I can't use it as an example.
Well, that's awesome. And again, glad to have you on. I know we've got some stuff we want to get into, but I do want to mention right out off the top our SFB 12 giveaway here on Dynasty Junkies. So we mentioned it a little bit last week, and I know it's if you follow us on Twitter at Dynasty Junkies, you can see our pinned tweet. I think it's our pinned tweet right now. The idea is that if you want to get into Scott Fishbowl and you're a fan of the show and you listen to us, you know we do a Find Me a Trade segment. And what we're asking you to do is submit your trades in one of Rocky's leagues. So it's a Rocky team. And I don't mean that as an indictment of the status of the team, but it's our compatriot Rocky Petrella, team late QB, old QB. He is actually putting up one of his teams as an option, and you're supposed to be able to find him a trade. And we're going to talk about that next week on the show on June 2nd. All four of us are going to be on. That's the plan for now anyway. And we're going to talk about what we think is the best trade of those submitted. And we'll decide pretty much live on the show. The only things you got to remember, you have to be registered. You have to be signed up for Scott Fishbowl to win. If you're submitting a trade and you are not signed up, then we can't give you the spot. So first things first, if you're listening to this and want to participate in Scott Fishbowl, the biggest of all charity leagues, and we'll talk to you about that, Pat. I know you've got some history with that. But Scott Fishbowl, go to scottfishbowl.com. You hit on apply and fill in all the info there. Get your name on the list. Even if you've already applied and you're just not sure, you can go there and check it out. See when you applied. You can go and see, if you have applied and you've even gotten in, you can change your settings and all that stuff. Terrific how much he's done with that site lately. But yeah, definitely do that. Follow us on Twitter. Submit your trade. The deadline, I believe, is next Thursday by 9 o'clock, pretty much when we go live. So just make sure that you have all those in this week. And we'd love to see some more junkies in the Scott Fishbowl. The more Dynasty fans, the better. So with that as a segue, Pat, I know listening to your podcast, you're giving away a Scott Fishbowl spot yourself. How long have you been in Scott Fishbowl? And what's your history with that charity league? I know we all have our own stories with it. What's yours?
Yeah. So when you asked me that question, I was thinking at first, what is this going to be, 5 for me? And then I went back and checked the My Fantasy League archives, and this is going to be my 7th year in the Scott Fishbowl.
There you go.
My first year was 2016. So as far as, let's see, history, I mean, I've made 2 conference finals. And then have never done very well in the conference finals. It's exciting because you're right on the cusp. Hey, if it's my week, I'm through to the finals, and then I'm one of 10 or 20 people to go for all the marbles. But haven't really come close. I think the highlight was maybe last year with the band theme divisions named after bands, and I was in the REM division playing with an actual member of REM, Mike Mills, the bassist. So
you can't beat that. That's pretty crazy.
Oh my God. It was, and he was really active in our league chat too.
That's
on there
great.
all the time, bantering back and forth. So super cool guy, super cool experience.
Yeah, I know with the band theme, that was a fun one last year. I was in the Incubus division, and so it was just a bunch of Incubus fans. And it was kind of nice to see some people I was familiar with that I was like, oh, I didn't know you were an Incubus fan. It's kind of oh, that's kind of cool. And then all the avatars coming out with all the different bands and all the shirts. I mean, I have so many shirts. It's ridiculous. And my wife's like, do you own anything but Scott Fishbowl shirts? I'm like, I don't know if I do anymore, to be honest. That's the t-shirt. I mean, I got a Thieves shirt. I'm repping the Thieves tonight. But I got, there's a couple other shirts I have, but really not many. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, I know, Bobby, you've had some history with Scott Fishbowl too. I want to give you a chance to kind of talk about your history with that. I mean, I think you mentioned that you're not looking to play in it this year. Is that correct?
So yeah, that's correct. Essentially, I made the decision not to sign up only because I think it's time that someone else gets my spot. I've played a number of years. Last year, I will call myself out. I don't think I paid as much attention to the league as it deserved. And I really enjoy the charitable aspect, and I enjoy more people getting involved. And while I know that Scott increases the league every year, I just didn't want to be a person taking up a spot because I know at some point he has to cap it. So my decision was to bow out, but I love this time of year and I love seeing it vicariously because everyone gets very charitable in the community. The avatars come out, you start to learn things about people like you were just talking about, Andrew, that you didn't know before. Oh, you're a fan of this video game or this band and you bond that way. And that's what it's all about for me at this point. I love playing the Dynasty game because I get to see the other facets of my league mates. I've been in leagues where I've seen people get new jobs, get married, start a family, and things of that nature. And that is the coolest part of it to me. No,
that's great. And I've actually heard a couple of people mention it in the same sort of vein where it's I I just don't have the energy, and it's July, and I'm not going to be able to put full time into it. And I actually really respect that. I wanted to say that to you here. And like, I personally feel like this is the most exciting time of the year. Like Scott Fishbowl drafts, like kicking off the season and getting in the DMs and like talking to different people and getting closer to, having your draft slot chats and everything. Like there's all these different ways to connect. So I love all of that. I'm also a big fan of the charity aspect, obviously. And it was actually really nice this year being a part of the Eliminators and kind of helping John Bosch and the group setting those up. That was entertaining and stressful and a lot more work than I noticed and realized until you're in it. And you're like, oh, this is a lot. Okay, this is a lot of work. Like it's just flooding in. So it was a lot of fun to be a part of that. So I'm excited to be a part of it in any way that I can. But I totally respect your decision. And I'm not ever going to say it to anybody, you need to be in it. You got to right now. No. Do what you want to do. If you don't feel up for it, don't do it. I totally get it.
I will say if you haven't gotten the opportunity to be in and you have the opportunity, sign up because it's definitely a unique experience. It's just, for me, I wanted somebody else to have that unique experience. I felt like mine had somewhat run its course.
And that's fine. Yeah. And I think too, this is something that I get questions from people every now and then around this time of year where they're like, well, do you have to be in the community? Like, do you have to be a content creator? And like, don't you have to have a website? Like, no, you don't. That's the best part about this whole thing. Literally, it's a pro-am. It puts pros, so to speak. And I'm using the term loosely there because obviously I write for Fantasy Pros. Pat is part of Fantasy Pros, but I'm using it with quote fingers, pros against Joes and people that are just fans of fantasy. And we're all experts. We all play this game for fun. None of us are better than anyone else. We're just more entertaining or more you die hard or this is just a fun hobby for some of us. Other people, this is their third hobby, So I always say to people, if you want to get in, apply. You never know. And if you want to get a free spot, fill out our form, do our find me a trade, kind of do there's a whole bunch of ways you can get in. And Pat, I wanted to give you a second too. What's the contest that you're running with Fitz on Fantasy? What's the thing you're doing over there?
So yeah, for listeners of the show, anyone who wants to can send me an email, and they can. I'm asking them to submit the name of someone they're going to target in the 22nd round of the 22 round Scott Fishbowl draft. So just kind of challenging them to dig deep and find some obscure, under the radar type of player. Gotten some pretty good submissions so far. So
I bet. Yeah.
It's always fun to because I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I want to plant a flag with that last guy. For me, it's usually either I'm a University of Wisconsin alum, so maybe it's an ex-Badger, or it's someone. Some dart throw I'm really excited about. Like last year was Albert O for me, which felt like it was a year early maybe, but I feel somewhat vindicated that now he's a sought after commodity. So yeah, that's the contest, and it's going to be a pleasure to give someone the chance to be in the Scott Fishbowl.
Yeah, has anybody pulled the fake names on you yet? Because Scott does add in fake names to the draft list, and those are sometimes fun to draft just to say you drafted those guys. Not saying I've ever personally done that because I took it a little too seriously, but I saw some league mates definitely take those guys just to be like, yes, I did draft this person.
Well, yeah, in Scott Fishbowl 10, when it was the video games, I think it was, I drafted Scott Fish with my 22nd round pick. You know what I mean? I'm like, I was like, hey, I see it on. I think maybe it was that or 9. I don't remember. But I remember drafting Scott Fish and being like, see, I win, right? Because I found the Easter egg in the video game thing. Like, that was fine. It didn't matter, but it was a lot of fun. That was the whole point. But I love the idea too. I mean, you're exactly right, Pat. This is a league. It's a redraft league with 22 rounds, which is pretty ridiculous. But since there's no trading and some players don't really pay attention to waivers because it gets to be, it's such a deep league, it kind of makes it so you don't have to pay attention to waivers as much because there's not a lot left in most cases. I mean, that first week is always kind of exciting to see who you get. But I think with the way the league is set up, it just makes sense to go super deep in the draft and then just kind of not necessarily set it and forget it like best ball, but just do a little less maintenance. It makes a little lighter impact on those of us that are in 50 other leagues or something. But yeah, I love having the 264th player and the last pick of the 22nd round, Mr. Irrelevant, like the NFL draft. You know what I mean? It's like someone that's so late and so ridiculous. You're like, you never know, right? Like last year, I remember taking Justin Jackson with my last round pick. I'm like, man, it's going to be the guy. And then I dropped him first chance on waivers because it didn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I love about it. you don't know. You got to take a flyer, and running backs are kind of like that. So I know I don't want to give too much away. I know your contest, Pat, is asking for people to submit their sleepers, and I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit with that being your contest. Like, what are some of the sleepers you're looking at? And let me write this down so if we're in the same draft, I can snipe you a little.
I mean, rookie running backs are always interesting dart throws, and obviously it can't be a rookie who's like being too highly touted for a possible like committee role or something, but he's probably not going to last that long. But maybe someone like Tyler Beatty on the Ravens. Maybe more realistic would be someone like Kennedy Brooks, who was an undrafted free agent, a guy I was pretty surprised he didn't get drafted. Like, I really liked him in college, and he goes to the Eagles, who have this kind of ambiguous backfield. I mean, Miles Sanders is going to play a pretty prominent role, but he's gotten hurt a lot. It seemed like Kenneth Gainwell almost kind of fell out of favor as the season wore on. And then, Boston Scott, who's kind of just a guy. And
I have him on like 6 teams, Pat. I need him to do well this year.
So Brooks is one, and then I mentioned my Badger affinity. So maybe someone like Jake Ferguson, who
there you go.
Now, I mean, so a day 3, I think he was day 3 tight end, and he goes to Dallas, where I think he's going to be the number 2 now. And I mean, Dalton Schultz got his opportunity being the number 2 behind Blake Jarwin, who got hurt, and all of a sudden Schultz is gets his chance, and now he's one of the most coveted tight ends out there. So
don't remind me, Pat. I had him in a few dynasty leagues, and I traded him away because I listened to the crowd telling me to. I held on to a few, but there's one I remember distinctly where I traded him for CJ Uzoma and a 3rd-round pick, and that one hurts me to this day.
Oh man! And like, even when he got the role, it's like, oh hey, this guy's in a pretty interesting spot now. I didn't think he was going to be like a tight end 1 though. That was, wholly unforeseen. It's not like he's some freakish athletic specimen. It's not like he had great draft pedigree, but here we are.
Yeah, someone said he is in that tight end mold of catch the ball and then fall down immediately after catching it.
He is, but, he's one of those guys who seems to just find like soft spots or beat whatever coverage he's in and like make himself available to the quarterback. And there's something to be said for guys like that, I guess.
Especially in the red zone, right? I mean, like, you get a lot of touchdown choices just being the guy that can catch the ball. Sometimes when you get down in that 3-yard line, Dak Prescott or any quarterback is like, I just don't want it to get knocked out. I don't want it to be a drop pass. Like, let me just put it to somewhere reliable. Schultz is a prime case of that. But I mean, Ferguson's not a bad pick. I actually like that one. I've seen him in a couple of dynasty leagues get snapped up after the draft was done, and I was like, well, that's not a bad angle because they do have some answers to be found after losing Cooper. They're gonna have to have somebody step up, and I mean, if Schultz were to get hurt or not be 100% or training camps, who knows? I mean, Ferguson could easily be a guy that moves up the rankings for sure.
He has pretty much been the best pass catcher at Wisconsin for the entirety of his college career, which is not saying a lot about the job they're doing recruiting wide receivers up in Madison. But and he's also the grandson of Barry Alvarez, the guy who came in and totally turned around the program. So, Barry Alvarez is just completely worshipped up in Madison. And, there we go, the bloodlines. So,
that's right. Well, if nothing else, it's a good story, right? It's like, hey, I'll take that guy with the 22nd pick. I love that logic. So I think that's probably
just really quick, I do like the Kennedy Brooks call. I feel like Kennedy Brooks is your favorite analyst's favorite undrafted running back, where like all the smart people seem to say take Kenny Brooks in late in your dynasty drafts or late in your redrafts, just in case Miles Sanders doesn't work out again and he's the guy. And I had a friend who was in on him, similar to all the people that we hear, but my friend is a big Devy guy, and we took him in a Devy draft like 4 years ago, and he's like, this is the guy. And I asked him what happened to him, and he said, don't worry, he's still the guy. So I'm choosing to believe in him with my 22nd pick if I have one.
Well, that's not bad at all. And I was going to say, like, my pick, which is going to be gone by the 22nd round, but somebody that I'm targeting in the second half of the draft is my Cincinnati Bearcat alum, Desmond Ridder. You know what I mean? I just think, honestly, like, Desmond Ridder is one of those guys that could be there. I think him and Jerome Ford both are going to go They're not going to be available at 260, 250. You know what I mean? They're not deep enough for your contest there. But I'm right there with you. I love taking flyers in that second half and just being like, I don't know, let's see what happens. Like maybe Ritter is the guy. Like maybe Jerome Ford gets, maybe Hunt gets cut or traded or something, and Ford does really well and leapfrogs Dearness Johnson, and then Chubb gets it. Like you can draw yourself a little map to be like, well, if these three things happen, I mean, that's better than some cases. I mean, you mentioned Tyler Beatty. I mean, is that kind of what your thoughts are with him too? Is like he's on a good running team and maybe he'll get lucky? Is that sort of the thought?
That's pretty much it. I mean, he's one injury away from being like a steady contributor. Like he's never going to have the sort of role he had. He was kind of the anomaly, the really small college running back who had this like massive workload at Missouri. I mean, he was pretty much the only thing that worked in that offense. And, I like him as the plucky, undersized guy who just got a ton of touches and did it against SEC competition. So, I'm hoping he gets a shot at some point. He's probably just going to be a little used number 3 behind Dobbins and Gus Edwards, but we'll see. I mean, those guys are both coming off pretty significant injuries, so you never know.
You never know. That's exactly right. And I'll use this to kind of pivot toward our dynasty discussion. I know when it comes to this time of year, and Scott Fishbowl, like I said before, is sort of the kickoff of redraft season. The one of the main reasons that I like dynasty, and I've liked this for the last few years, ever since I started playing, is that it kind of keeps you up to date on things. You never have to really catch up, right? I feel like I'm always sort of up to speed. So that's where I feel like those of us that play dynasty and are focusing on this year round, maybe I would like to think we have a slight advantage, but it doesn't seem to really be working for me and Scott Fishbowl. But I feel like there's this slight advantage that we have where we kind of go into this, May, June, July timeframe, and we're already talking about rookies. We've had rookie drafts in our dynasty leagues, things like that. So that's actually where I wanted to go next in a way. But I wanted to ask you too, Pat, like how long have you been playing dynasty? I know Fitz on Fantasy is not a dynasty podcast per se. It's more just fantasy in general, and you're a year-round podcast, but I don't think it's dynasty focused. Am I right there?
Correct. I mean, it kind of shifts that way, I would say, after the end of the NFL season. And for a few months, it's pretty dynasty intensive. But then, as the summer goes on, I definitely shift the focus back to redraft as people start to, and I think you nailed it, Andrew, like people do sort of hibernate when they're redraft players. And then, sometime around like late July, start, realizing like, oh, wow, this guy's here now? When did that happen? Probably a lot of those people missed that, Darrell Williams just signed with Arizona. And, 2 months from now, they're going to be like, wait, Darrell Williams isn't on the Chiefs anymore? What happened? So believe it or not, I've only been playing Dynasty since 2018. I was pretty much exclusively a redraft guy. And then I was invited to play in a Fantasy Pros Dynasty League, and I'm like, I should probably do this. A lot of people are getting into Dynasty, and I just kind of fell for it right away, and I've been like adding like 1 or 2 leagues pretty much every year since. I think I'm up to like 6 actively managed ones and then 2 sort of more passive best ball type Dynasty leagues, but really love it. And I like the ever-changing landscape, just the how value shifts so dramatically, and just 1 second I was feeling good about the roster, and like a month later I'm like, what the hell happened? Like a bomb hit my roster, and then other times I feel like I have an okay roster, and like this one in my Dynasty home league just somehow turned into a monster last year. Like,
I love when that happens.
Yeah, all of a sudden, like, hey, look, Deebo Samuel became a god, and I had Dallas Goedert, and they traded Zach Ertz away. Finally, this guy gets going, and I think I also had Dawson Knox on that team. So, just like a lot of things can fall into place, and just love it. I mean, it's just tracking the constant value changes, and it gives you something to do year round. So, I've totally fallen for Dynasty.
It's weird to be on a podcast because I'm not used to this, to be honest, where I'm the one who's been playing Dynasty the longest. Because usually I'm on podcasts and people are like, I've been playing Dynasty since like the 1990s. And in this case, I know Andrew is a little more recent too.
I'm 2018, just like Pat. Yep, that was my first Dynasty year.
I've been playing since 2014, I want to say, so not too much longer than you guys. But I was basically my first year, it was like, this is the Odell year and all those rookies coming out. And I was like, Dynasty is great. Every rookie ever hits. This is amazing. And then 2015 happened, and I was like, oh, or maybe it's 2016, or I might even be confusing my years, but at some point, Laquan Treadwell happened, and he was like a 103 pick, and I was like, oh, this isn't as fun as I thought it was, or as easy as I thought it was.
Yeah, it's just everybody picks correctly in the rookie draft because everybody does great. In 2014, that worked out. Yeah. And we had Chris Harris on last week, and we were talking about that with him and how like this, like it's not always like this. You know, like this year is a really interesting year for Dynasty and rookie drafts. There's, especially in Superflex, like there really just is maybe one quarterback in the first round. And I feel like last year we had like 5. You know, you could honestly like go deep. And even the year before that, I think was the Mac Jones year. I think we had 5 in that one. You know what I mean? Like just you can get really deep into some of these first rounds. And this year it's like crickets. You know, it's very receiver heavy. There's 2 running backs, a quarterback, and 9 receivers. And you might get a James Cook in there. And I mean, there's some other kinds there. But I mean, like Pat, I definitely, I mentioned this in our chat or whatever, and I mentioned it on the show sheet. Like James Cook is polarizing. We talked about it a little bit last week with Chris Harris, but I want to hear your thoughts on James Cook because I know you and the Trades HQ guys, and again, repping the other brands, this is the HQ crew. I know you and the HQ guys last week or something talked about James Cook and all this. What are your thoughts on James Cook in general, and kind of where do you stand? Is he a first round pick in your mind?
Yeah, and a little later I'll tell you a story involving the HQ guys and James Cook. So we'll get to that soon enough, though. But
I like it.
Yeah, and boy, for him, and first of all, what you were about James Cook, yeah. So I think he is a borderline first rounder. I think he's kind of right on the cusp of, 112, 201. I think he is probably going to slip into the first round of most leagues. And I tend to think that people are maybe getting a little too in love with the landing spot. Mm-hmm. Yes, the Bills probably have the best all-around offense in the NFL right now, and Cook is going to walk right into, maybe a pretty significant role. I don't think he's got any chance to completely displace Devin Singletary. And even if Singletary got hurt, I think it would be Cook sharing the role with someone else. Like, I don't think there's any sort of like heavy duty upside there. And we have kind of seen Josh Allen drain the value of the running backs around him for a long time. Like he doesn't really dump off. When he's in trouble, he runs it himself. He doesn't dump it off to backs. He calls his own number inside the 10 or inside the 20 for that matter. I mean, he runs in a lot of touchdowns himself. He has not been like a bonanza for the running backs on the Bills. No. And, even though they're going to score a lot of touchdowns, it's typically not the running backs in Buffalo scoring a very significant share of those touchdowns. So what I was groping for to say earlier, by the way, Andrew, is just, whenever people first get into Dynasty, like as you were talking about, and the weirdness of there being really not much in the way of quarterbacks in this draft, like I always tell them to play Superflex because it's like, look, after the startup, the only drafts you're going to be doing are rookie drafts, and rookie drafts are infinitely more interesting in Superflex when the quarterbacks are worked in and have value. Otherwise, the quarterbacks are just not that valuable. Except this year.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I've had to give people that caveat when I explain this. Like normally that's the case, just not this year. This year it's more like every draft is a 1 quarterback league draft.
Yeah, because there's so much upside there.
After my own heart, Pat, because I used to write for a little known website, and I'm joking because it's not little known, called 2QBs, run by everyone's favorite Sal. And I wrote for the draft guide one year a article called Intro to Superflex. And it was all in the style of the dodgeball like video reel from that movie, because that was popular when I was a teen and I decided to reference it. And at the end, I kind of joked, but I said, like, those of us who play Superflex are better than you, and we know it. And back then, that was somewhat of a hot take, but now it seems like the way things have trended, Superflex is pretty much just the default, at least for those hardcore Dynasty players. And so it makes me very happy to hear all of these people talking about, yes, you have to play Superflex because it makes rookie drafts more interesting. Again, I will say, play whatever you want to play. Yep. But my personal opinion is that Superflex just makes things so much more interesting. I also think and I'm just throwing this out there since we're on the topic, that tight end premium, and not a light premium, but an actual heavy premium, like the TA leagues, that 1.75 really does make that position more interesting too. And just all around, the more positions that are interesting, the more fun I have, at least.
No, for sure. Yeah, and I'm in one QB league. It's all I've got left out of like 13 leagues or whatever at this point. Every league I've joined up since then has been Superflex. That was my first league, and it's my home league. And I don't know if we're ever going to be able to convert it, because some of these guys, even in dynasties, take 3 months off. You know what I mean? Like, as soon as the season ends in December, they kind of go about their business, and then we haven't even had a rookie draft yet. Like, it's scheduled for, I think, a week from this Saturday, June 4th is when we're kicking it off with the slow clock. And it's like, even then guys are like, why are we doing this in June? Why can't we just do this in August? And I'm like, okay, this isn't redraft. You know what I mean? Like, but there's so much more information in August. I'm like, exactly. This is the part, like, this is the whole point, is to like put your flag on someone and like go out there on a limb and be like, I'm taking my guy, you know, like why aren't we doing it in May? Like, why are we doing it in June? Like, it's a compromise. So outside of that, to hit on your tight end point, I also love the tight end premium. And I was in a couple of them last year. I was in the safe leagues a couple years ago. That was kind of my first intro to tight end premium. And I was like, I kind of dig this. Like, the tight ends do kind of matter a little more, and they're kind of figuring each other out. Like, you know, you can start 2 of them then and make sense because of the scoring and all this. I am in one that is a 2 tight end league. I do not like that. Not 2 points. I'm saying start 2 tight ends. Like, nope, I don't like that. That is not, nope. Although in that league, I do have Kyle Pitts and Dallas Goedert, so I'm kind of okay. And I've got Jamar Chase and Jonathan Taylor, so I'm not giving the team up. But it's like, that's not my favorite. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I'm with you though. I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm not here to say you're doing it wrong. I think that's exactly what, and to kind of tie it back even into Scott Fishbowl, that's one of the things I love about Scott Fishbowl, is that he introduces people to new ideas, right? Like last year was the 3rd round reversal was new, I think last year. And, you know, obviously kickers as a flex, that was kind of new. And I know he's done like, you know, bonus scoring and like, you know, video game scoring and all this. So like, I love that kind of stuff where he can introduce new concepts. And I think even Scott Fishbowl was one of the first places that like really did PPR as like a solid thing. And that was, you know, back 10 years ago now, that was kind of like a big deal. And now that's what every league is. Like, I don't know a single league that's not some sort of PPR anymore. So yeah, it's just kind of fun to see how, like you said, Pat, the ever-changing landscape. Like, it's weird that we play this long-term game, but all of us are very kind of short window people. You know, Dynasty, everybody likes to say, oh, I have this player forever. It's like, I know myself, I'm going to trade them away 30 times, so it really doesn't matter. But also at the same time, like, I want to win now. I don't want to win 10 years from now. I want to win right now. Everybody should want to win now. And like we said last week with Chris Harris, like, Dynasty becomes redraft in August, and they kind of overlap a lot. And then you have this weekly game. And so for a few weeks, they're the same game. And so we're all kind of in the same boat. And I love that time where it's just sort of like Dynasty or redraft doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, they're both fun. They're both entertaining. I am still in a couple redraft leagues. I know a lot of charity leagues are redraft for a lot of reasons. So yeah, I mean, it's just good times. Anytime you can play fantasy with some friends and, you know, watch football with something else on the line, I'm a fan of that. But I do want to pivot into something else. And I know I put some of this on the show sheet, and I love that you came up with some good answers here. But we always talk about Dynasty and the ever-changing landscape, and the valuations that change. But a lot of times that comes with, you know, age is a big one in Dynasty, right? Like, what are we looking for, I guess? And maybe, Pat, where are you at with Dynasty? Like, how differently do you value players in terms of, you know, youth versus veterans or rookies versus older guys? Like, where are you at with all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, that's age is so important. And I think that's what we have to consider more so in Dynasty, and like adjust our way of thinking to, is that a player's value is not just in the fantasy points he scores for you. It's in what the market perception is of him. And as long as he's a young player, that usually salvages a market perception. There's some like raised base of his perception if he's a young player. I mean, there might still be people holding out hope for Jalen Reagor at this point because he's young. Maybe, that might be stretching it a little bit. All right.
That's a good 22nd round pick.
But, you know, I mean, maybe there's hope for Brian Edwards, who washed out.
Denzel Mims, there's definitely still hope for him.
Yeah, there is, man. Yeah. I've got a fellow Packers fan who's like screaming for the Packers to pick up Denzel Mims. I'm like, I don't know, dude. He hasn't been able to carve out a spot with the Jets for 3 years. What makes you think he's going to... So
J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, right? Like one of those guys, like just like N'Keal Harry. You know what I mean? Like, what a bust. Talk about, you know, bad rookie drafts. Last year or 2 years, it was 2 years ago, I think, wasn't it? He was like the number one overall. I talk about it all the time because it just scarred my brain. But you're exactly right. Like the age is a lot more important, but it's not everything, right? I mean, like age isn't the whole thing.
Right. It's definitely not, but it's something you always have to factor in. And maybe that's like still a flaw of mine, that I maybe play the age thing a little bit too much. And I know whenever I draft, like eventually I'm going to do a startup dynasty draft where I just like throw all the chips into the middle and play to win right away, but I never do. I can never talk myself into it. Like I'm always trying to win it in year 2.
Yeah.
And, build that strong young roster.
Yeah.
But it would be just once I'm going to have to like break myself of that and just go for it and be like, yeah, I'm going to take these like veteran low hanging fruit values up and down the draft and just kick your rear ends in year 1.
It's cyclical. Just speaking as someone who's been playing maybe a little bit longer, not to be like the old guy who's been playing for so long, but it really is cyclical in the dynasty community, because what you'll see is like when I first started playing, everyone was really in on veterans basically and saying like, oh, you want to win right now and it's so cheap. And then all these young guys hit and they're like, oh my God, these guys are going to be in the league for the next 10 years. We're going to build true championships around them. And then you had some bad classes and people are like, okay, the veterans are kind of cheap again. Let's go. And then suddenly it was like, oh, but all these young guys. And what happened too is around the time that you two joined, there were a lot of new players who came in at that time in general. And so right now in the community, and to Pat's point, a lot of this is about market perception and your league's perception. Those young guys are very highly valued. So there's nothing wrong with taking those young guys. At the same time, here's a little pro tip. If a guy like Adam Thielen is sitting out there and you can get him for like a late second round pick because people are like, oh, he's 31, you should probably do that because the chances of that second round pick hitting are pretty low. What people in Dynasty like to draw lines in the sand on this age thing. And I'm here to tell you that is the wrong approach. You want balance. You want young wide receivers who can come in and take over as your old wide receivers age out of the league. Running backs, this is just my take, but you generally just want youth, especially because they tend to age out of the league pretty quickly. I know there are some people who joke, once a running back hits like 27 or 28, they might as well be running around with a walker. Some people are exceptions to that. Personally, I think Derrick Henry, for example, will be an exception to that and continue to be a dynasty value. But the thing that I found the smartest people that I've played with have advocated in Dynasty is a balance of having youth and veterans and trading away some of your picks, but also keeping certain picks and so forth and so on. It's not so much like I'm going to take a hard stance on this. It's much more being fluid and adaptable to what your league is doing.
I like that. And I am a huge fan, a huge advocate of balance, not only in age and youth and all of that kind of balance, but, upside versus floor too, like risk versus, consistency. I mean, like you kind of I feel like the teams that I like the most kind of have that mix where you can still get to the upside, where you can be the best in the league. But like we always say too, the worst place in Dynasty is 6th. You know what I mean? Like the worst place to be is right in the middle. Like if you're not going to win, you might as well go all in and go for all youth and trade for only picks. Like I love that aspect of Dynasty because in redraft, if you're 0-5 in redraft, you're kind of like, well, that was fun. You know what I mean? Like I'm kind of done. Like what am I going to do to turn this around? I mean, you got to win out. I mean, it's so much more stressful. Whereas in Dynasty, it's like I'm not giving up, but I'm retooling my team. I'm going to take on, a Calvin Ridley or a Deshaun Watson or a Juju last year. Those kind of players that are like, I don't know what's going to happen, or like Zeke even. Like one of those guys, you're like, I don't know what's going to happen, but maybe his value goes up and I can benefit somehow. And I don't mind taking on risk at that point, right? So that's what I love about Dynasty too. But even in that regard, I mean, we talk about trading a lot on this show, and that's kind of what our family podcast is Trade Addicts, right? And that they're big on trading. I'm a huge fan of trading. I know Bobby and I have had some discussions sometimes when I'm not on podcast, Bobby, where you talk about how bad I am at trading, which is totally true, by the way. Like I just like, I don't know. It sounded fun to me. I don't know. I just do it sometimes because I'm bored. And that's sort of where I've been listening to Russ so long. I just think it kind of seeped into my brain where I'm just like, meh, like let's have fun with it. But
to clarify for the audience, I wouldn't say you're necessarily bad at trading. I would say that sometimes you trade for the sake of trading, which can be ill-advised would be the word that I use.
That's a good word. And I don't think I'm bad at it, actually. I think I'm pretty good at it. But there are definitely times where I make what could be considered a bad trade and I just don't care. And I also think, and this is sort of, I don't know, my sort of generality, like I said before, I don't have players long enough to really worry. I always end up trading more anyway. It's just like, if I make a bad trade, I'll just make another one and makes up for it. There have also been times where, and this may sound strange, but in my home league especially, I'll end up getting some really good deals on players. They're like, not fleece them or anything, but like, hey, that was a pretty, unfair trade or lopsided trade. And then after a while, you're kind of like, well, I do kind of owe the world a little karma and I'll lose this trade. You know what I mean? Like I got to do a little bit back to the world. And so I think sometimes when I love sending just vacuum trades on Twitter where it's like, I put up a trade and I'm like, which side do you like? Just like no context, like just pick a side. And then there's, it comes out 50-50. I'm like, well, then it wasn't lopsided anyway. You're like, what the, like everybody values everybody so differently. And again, just for one quick second while I'm in this mini rant, I love when I see a trade that is like 85-15. And it's like, so everybody is a fan of the 85. And I'm like, but not really, because there's still 15%, which is like one or two players in your league might want that other side. And this is where I got into it with John Bosch, because I'm like, well, if it's not 100%, if there's one or two players in my league that would take this trade, why not send it to them and see if they're one of those two? Like, I don't know, why not? Like, let's just have a little fun with it. You know what I mean? So
I want to ask Pat how he feels about drafting and trading, but really quick, Andrew, just to be that guy, because I am somewhat of a numbers guy. I took
Bring it on, Bobby.
and things of that nature. It depends on the sample size, right? Because if you're talking about 15% of 12, that's great. If you're talking 15% of 1,000, then the chances are that one of those people is in your league is very, very, very low.
There could be 12 of them in my league, Bobby. I mean, there's more than 12 that said yes to it. I don't know. Why not?
Statistically unlikely, but possible. Anyway, Pat, this is a long lead into asking you whether you prefer drafting or trading. And then I know it wasn't on the show sheet, so I'm throwing you a bit of a curveball here. But what would you say your general trading style is?
Yeah. Oh, so I prefer drafting because just truth be told, I mean, like, life's busy, busy job, 2 kids, dog, wife. It's hard to sometimes like cook up trades. And if someone sends me an offer that's like not really in the ballpark, like it's work to, here I'm kind of going about my day and maybe I'm in the middle of something and I get this offer and I look at it and the offer kind of sucks. It's like, do I have time to like look at this person's roster and maybe try to come up with something that they would be agreeable to? Or do I just kind of dismiss it because it's such a, lopsided offer? Like, this wasn't really a good faith offer. I'm just going to hit reject. Sorry. Like I won't do that in my home league where it's like good friends. That's more kind of like in the league where I'm in it with strangers or whatever. I don't want to be stand Pat Fitzmaurice, but sometimes it turns out I'm kind of like that. But I would say my trading style, Bobby, is that like I want to, like when I make an offer, I don't come to the table with like, I'm not fishing, like I'm not trade spamming. Like I legitimately try to put myself in the shoes of the other person. Like if I was them, would I do this trade? Like, does this satisfy what I'm looking for? Like, sometimes I think people just kind of like, what they want from you and they don't look at what you need. Like I'm, trying to like, if I want something from someone and like I look at what their biggest need is, like where are they hurting? Like what parts of their team do they feel bad about right now? And like, how can I help them patch up that weakness? So, generally, I kind of like to do it that way because then there's really not much negotiation. They either like the deal or they don't, and if they reject it, I'm always like, oh, I really thought they were going to take that. And then if they counter, and it's usually them just, trying to pile on and feel like they won the deal, and I'll be like, no, I'm good. I'll just walk away. So, I mean, I really like to make the earnest attempt to get a mutually beneficial trade. I know in one league I play with Jamie Eisenberg of CBS. And Jamie is like the exact same type of trader. And we've had like these, 3-minute negotiations where it's just like this, like we're both into those fair, balanced trades where we're actually like both trying to accomplish something and help the other person accomplish something. And he's like the easiest guy in the world to trade with. And I really appreciate that.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
And I think there's
Sorry,
no
guys.
wrong way to trade. I think that's the other thing we always kind of come down to. But it's also league dependent, right? I mean, like there are some leagues, like you mentioned it before too, like there are some leagues that just don't do a lot of trading.
Sure.
Like there are some leagues where to pull off a trade, you have to overpay. Or, you know, some managers that you traded with before that you just know is like pulling teeth. And so when you get an offer from them, you're like, is this worth my time going back and asking for that extra third? You know, in some leagues, like a trade addicts league, heck yeah, it is. Like we're all crazy people that do this all the time.
Right.
Like why not? You know, it's a trade addicts league. Like that's kind of the whole point. But then there are some leagues like my home league where it's like I can't get a trade done to save my life, and they all know each other. So when I start offering one guy Dalvin Cook, they send a message to the other guy like, "Hey, Andrew sent me an offer for Dalvin Cook. Did you get that?" I'm like, it just like it all kind of crumbles to the ground. You know, it's like, oh man, they all know I'm shopping him. Like, but at the same time, like it is kind of fun too to see the valuation difference, right? I say this all the time on Twitter too. If we all agreed on valuation, how boring would this game be? Like if we all agreed on everything, like come on, that's boring. Nobody wants to play that way.
I was asking this question somewhat because I had an idea of how you would answer, Pat, and because this had been a debate recently on the show. Just because Andrew, I am very similar to you, although I will say that I do owe someone an apology because I talked about this on the Trade Addicts podcast the other day, and I mentioned that in one of my leagues, I saw someone essentially take advantage, or at least in my opinion, take advantage of a league mate, and so then I typically like to try to send fair offers too, but I saw that happen and I go, I want to get in on this action. So then I sent an offer that did get accepted ultimately. But then I will say the league mate that I talked about, and I talked about it on a podcast so he could very clearly hear it, was upset and I felt bad about it. And now I'm going back to my, oh man, I feel really bad about this. And I'm going to try to make sure this is fair again in future offers because I recognize that I did do something that I honestly, even though it's a play to win type of game, I just don't like to play that way. And I don't like to win that way. So I will say, Clint File, if you are listening, I am sorry. I did not mean to do that. But I did also ask this question somewhat because Andrew, I'm not trying to call Andrew out here. He's just a different type of trader than we are, where he will send an offer that is maybe a little bit less than his top end, or maybe sometimes send like a fishing offer. But he also, I will say, from talking to him, he's not one of those people that people get mad about where he's sending like a ridiculously lopsided offer just to send it.
Right.
He is still sending stuff that he thinks is within the realm of the ballpark, just on the low end. And he does tailor it. So, for example, if he was playing in a league with yourself, Pat, or myself, I don't believe he would send us those kinds of offers because he recognized we would just decline and not even counter.
Yes. Exactly.
But if he's playing in like a public safe leagues, he'll make those kinds of offers. And I get it. But I'm like you, where I have a friend who I will shout out right now. He has Lopsided Trades on Twitter. He's the person who got me into fantasy football. And I started writing on his site. He's my best friend in real life, best man at my wedding. Very similar. We've had what we call a price check when we started playing Dynasty, where I could go like, yeah, price check on this player. And he'd be like, oh, I'd take like probably like a second for him. And we'd be like, okay, here, done deal. We don't do that much anymore. I think we've gotten a little more holding our cards slightly closer to our vest, but it's still, when we have trade negotiations, it's usually pretty quick to tell whether we're on the same page about value or not.
I like that price check idea.
Yeah, I like that too. And that's where I used to get burned on my rankings because people are like, oh, it looks like you have so-and-so over so-and-so. Would you take this trade? And I'm like, oh man. Like I said to Chris Harris last week, I'm like, I'm so glad I don't do rankings that nobody can exploit them anymore. Like that's just terrifying. But I mean, on that same kind of page, I work in sales, and so it's all about the margin. It's all about profit. Like I could sell it to you for 1,000, but I might as well try for 1,200 and see what you say. Like give me a little wiggle room. It's a negotiate. So like that's just it's just my job. It's just what I do. I'm in sales, so it's like I can give you my best and final, but there's nothing more annoying. And I said this to Bosch that week, where I was like, there's nothing more annoying than sitting down and spending like 15 solid minutes building a trade that makes sense for both sides. You're like, this works, this is perfect. And you send it over and they're like way off. And you're like, what? It makes like I put it through every calculator. It makes total sense. Like the rent, it helps you at QB where you're weak. Like it makes, and they're just like way off. And you're like, you know what? Why did I waste all my time with that? Might as well just send like a low ball-ish offer, as you said, like a fishing offer. And be like, hey, and if they accept it, great. But I'll be honest, the amount of times I get a trade accepted on the first offer is probably 1 out of 100. And that's fine with me. That's fine with me. Like I accept that. It's a consequence of my choice. So like, that's kind of where I like trading. So I don't mind the negotiation. I don't mind the talk. I don't mind going back and forth. And I just got a trade done today in Trade Addicts 1 where it was like, we'd been going back and forth for about a week, give or take. And I was like, here's where we're at with this. Like, how close? And he's like, well, it's pretty close. And he showed me a DTC that showed his side in favor. And I was like, that's really funny. I showed him a DLF that had my side in favor. And I'm like, what do we do here? You know what I mean? Like, we're kind of at a crossroads. And I ended up adding Jamison Crowder. And I was like, I lose the trade, but it gets it done. We'll move on. You know what I mean? Like, it makes him happy, makes me happy. Like, Jamison Crowder is not going to make or break my team. You know what I mean? Like, that's a depth piece on a rebuilding team. I could care less. But that's what I love about this. Is like the trade talks to me are some of the most fun. But that's where you really get to know somebody. You really get to see how they operate. You kind of see how, not honest, that sounds bad, but like see how they are and like how aggressive they are, or like if they value players the same as you. Like, that was fun for me. That's where I have the most fun by far, isn't trade.
I will also say I think this is somewhat of a personality thing, because I am very much not in sales, and a lot of my jobs have involved teaching. And so I think, like, as I just noted, I felt bad that I essentially like sold this other league mate on making a trade with me. And I didn't really like push too hard on it, because that's not my style, but I just said, like, this is what I'm offering, take it or leave it, more or less. And that's even pretty pushy for me. But I usually like to educate other people, and have sometimes done it at my own detriment. In a past life, not so much now, I legitimately advised someone on a trade with myself and said whether I would take it or not. And essentially was like, I would ask this person, pretending they're not me, for this and see if they say yes. And then I was like, yeah, I guess I'll do that. That seems fair.
That's like John Candy's character telling his bunkmate how to play his cards in the poker game in Stripes, basically.
Yeah.
Against him.
Yeah, it was because they were newer to Dynasty, and so I didn't want them to have a bad experience. And I was just like, look, I will help you out here. I will help you craft a trade offer to myself, essentially.
Well, I mean, they're also, I mean, in Dynasty too, is these are your only 11 options for what could be the foreseeable future for the next couple of years, even. And so, you burn somebody or you make a bad trade, and they're much less likely to trade with you in the future. Now you've just gone down to 10 teams, right? Or what if they've got a guy that you like? Let's say they've got T. Higgins, and you're willing to pay whatever it takes for T. Higgins. You're like, I'll send you Jonathan Taylor for T. Higgins, and they're like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not trading with you. You know what I mean? Like, it just shuts down sometimes the whole conversation. So you do have to be careful, right? And I think too with random leagues or other things like that, it can be a way to just start some negotiations and sort of see how it goes. But you're exactly right, Bobby. There are players of all sorts. I mean, there are people kind of like myself. I don't have any kids. I don't have any time. I just like building trades. I send 30 a day. Not every day, but some days when I'm bored. And then there are days where, I go 3 or 4 days without sending an offer, and I start getting that itch. I'm on Junkies, like, let's be honest. So it's like, I love when an offer shows up in my inbox, because it's like, ooh, I get to counter. Because like I almost always counter. Like, that's just my thing. Like, you're showing me your cards, I'll show you a little. We'll go. And so I also get it that there are people that just never counter. Like you said, Pat, you're like, yeah, it just doesn't do it for me. Just decline, And like you're saying sorry. That's such a Wisconsin polite thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, I'm really sorry. I don't feel interested in this trade. But I think that happens a lot where people just don't say anything, and it's like, that's okay too.
Maybe I need to move to Wisconsin, because when I decline without a comment, I often say, like, sorry, I just wasn't that interested too. And I'm a New Yorker, and I feel like that does not fit in with the personality type of a New Yorker. So it sounds like I need to move.
Well, it's all right. I mean, I'm sure you're a different New Yorker than most, Bobby. I can already tell that about you. We had some other discussion points on the show sheet, but we're already at 53 minutes, if you can believe it. So I think what we'll probably do is just kind of skip ahead. But is there anything in that other discussion we had talked about bringing up some rankings at all? I don't want to skip it entirely, Pat, if you have something you want to mention. But is there anybody that you're really looking at, or maybe targeting in drafts or targeting in trades, since we're kind of talking about that, maybe that you think is being criminally undervalued before we move into our own trade segment?
So I've been really beating the drum for A.J. Dillon this week. And I think his value is kind of underappreciated. For one, with the Devontae Adams trade, I think the Packers are going to run at a higher percentage this year, and I think they're going to target their running backs at a higher percentage in the pass game. And what I think is sort of escaping people, like there's a big, at least in redraft, there's a big gap in the ADPs of Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. And what I think people missed is that over the last 10 games of the season for the Packers in the regular season, Dillon and Jones played 8 games together. And in those 8 games, Jones averaged 10.2 carries a game and Dillon averaged like 13.7. Like, he was significantly out carrying. Like, that, the split really shifted toward the end of the season, and they were starting to like make Dillon their goal line back too. So even in Dynasty, where it's almost always full PPR. Dylan was actually like a surprisingly efficient and good pass catcher. Like, just watching the games as a Packer fan, like he was making catches outside the frame of his body when Aaron Rodgers would occasionally uncork kind of a wild one. Just didn't do it in college, but like he's got pass catching chops. So I like him a lot. I like Kadarius Toney. I'm just like chasing the dragon there. I know he had like 7 different injuries late in the season and COVID and like everything else. But man, what I saw out of that guy in like weeks 4 and 5 last year, like just looked so exciting. And,
you're welcome on the show anytime, Pat.
Good.
As a Giants fan, you're welcome
fan.
on the show anytime.
Good. I'm glad you're with me on that, Bobby. I kind of like Adam Troutman. I think he just fits the profile of like a sneaky upside tight end where it's like you never want the rookies and you never want the old guys who've been around, because if they've been around 4 or 5 years, if you're waiting for them to pop, it would have happened by now in most cases. But Troutman, like, he's been used just enough. He's kind of like in that Dawson Knox zone where he had maybe like an 8 or 9% target share, just enough to be involved kind of. And I just think he's like a talented guy. I remember how they were raving about him at the Senior Bowl, and just that offense just didn't go according to plan last year. So I think it could look a little better for him this year. And I want to get your take on this one. And I mentioned I'd get back to the HQ trade that I made with Shane Manila. And we're in a 14-team league together. And it's funny because Shane has like crapped on this draft class on podcasts that we've been on together for like, the last 5 or 6 months. I mean, and all of a sudden I'm on the clock at 114. This was like my third first-round draft pick. I made this Christian McCaffrey trade that netted me a bunch of picks. And all of a sudden I get this offer from Shane offering his, he wants my 114 and my 207 in exchange for Antonio Gibson and his 402. And, I'm just amused that Shane is here trying to get draft picks in this class he hates so much. But like, wow, he must really be giving up on Antonio Gibson. Like, the guy's still only 23, and maybe the Commanders hate him. I mean, they keep bringing back J.D. McKissick. They drafted Brian Robinson. Like, apparently they just don't want to give him the role, even though this guy was playing on like a broken leg last year for him. But the guy's 23 and he's really good, and he has pass catching chops, even though they don't seem to want to leverage him in that role. So I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to bet on the talent. And he took the aforementioned James Cook, and I think he actually took Brian Robinson with pick 207, as if to kind of tweak me on that trade or something. But so I don't know. What did you guys think of that? Like, I think Gibson is kind of an interesting trade target at this point because he's still really young and he's really talented. He's just in this kind of frustrating role.
I will let Andrew go first because I have a very specific comment to make about how Shane trades and just Shane as a person. So I will let Andrew go first before I give my comment.
Well, I did have something to say about Shane. I love sending Shane trades when I know he's on a live stream because he does so many different podcasts. I love sending him one because sometimes he's looking for content and he'll accept a trade even though it's a little off. Because I love that about trade. About Shane. He's a big trader. He's like me. He's like, I'll look at it and be like gut feeling yes or no, and then sometimes I'll like, oh, I should have put that in a calculator. So like I might have been able to get more, but no, I think I actually really like the Antonio Gibson side. I have him on a bunch of teams. Because I got him either at the end of last season or, right before the trade deadline to kind of make a push, which didn't work, or, leading up to the draft, there was some discussion with they finally got Wentz and there was like, well, what are we doing? And so like there was a whole lot of confusion. There still is, right? But I'm with you, Pat. I think Antonio Gibson, is still a fine choice for an RB2. I mean, there really aren't that many solid RBs that you can really lean on. And I think Gibson's better than most. I don't think this is ballsy, but I think Gibson is significantly better than James Cook. I would much rather put Gibson in my lineup than James Cook. And I don't mind the depth of getting the 207 for, I think you said it was a fourth that you got back with Gibson, so you're trading back a little bit. Like all of those picks in this draft are all kind of that flat circle of time where it's like, who knows? I mean, you could get somebody with that 4th round pick that's still terrifically valuable and blow up. So I think it's a great trade for you. I thought that was awesome for Antonio Gibson.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks.
All right. So I will make my comments. There's a couple
pleasure.
things here. One, I think, Pat, you saw on Twitter that I talked about how I feel about James Cook. I've said it on a few podcasts as well. I agree with all your thoughts that you laid out, both on the HQ podcast and also just on this podcast just now, where I think James Cook is being a little overhyped. And here's the thing to know about Shane. And if you're a Dynasty notebook type person, you might want to take notes on this. Shane is probably the most reactionary trader that I've ever encountered in my life, where if there's negative news about a player, he'll be like, I want this guy off my team, like immediately. And so like, even if it's like, a good example would be if Shane had Jerry Jeudy, with the news that happened with Jerry Jeudy, Shane would have traded him immediately. If there's bad camp news that's not about their outside football life, he will be like, this guy needs to go pretty much. If there's good camp news, he's in on it. He's just very, very reactionary. And so I get it. I get that the Commanders are kind of telling us that Antonio Gibson is never going to be that workhorse that we want him to be. But that doesn't mean he's dead for fantasy. And so I'm totally fine with giving up James Cook and Brian Robinson to get Antonio Gibson and a dart throw. I think that once the season actually hits and Antonio Gibson is scoring points again, if you really wanted to, you could flip him for more than Shane gave up for, or you gave up to get him from Shane. So I love the move from a dynasty perspective. I think even though I just talked about how I don't like taking advantage of people's proclivities, there is, I guess, a small part of me that does enjoy it. And I think you essentially did that to Shane, even though he's the one who offered it. And all you had to do was click accept, I guess. So good job there, Pat.
What I would love to do is, since Shane is like so down on this draft class, and then like always talking about how like, you know, you can't get a 2023 draft pick away from him. Like you'd have to pry it from his cold dead hands. I'd love to see Antonio Gibson blow up and then like me offer him back to Shane for his 2023 first or something. Like get Shane to do the exact opposite of what he has preached on his pod, like trade 4 2021 picks or 2022 picks and trade away a 2023 first rounder.
Well,
like,
Shane is so reactionary and he's in so many leagues. He might send that to you to get Antonio Gibson on his team. He'd be like, take my 23 first. I need this guy. Like I've heard him talk about that on HQ a couple times. And I know I've seen trades, and I'm in a couple leagues with him now where it's like, we traded back and forth. Like I think I traded him Debo, and then he traded him back like 6 weeks later or like a year later. Like it's just like, cause we just trade all the time. Like, and you forget the history in some cases of who you have where. And he's also, he's done the same thing. And I know I've done it, where I get an offer on like an MFL email and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll take that trade. I'm like, oh, I was on the other side. Like I wasn't even, you know what I mean? Like I've totally done that where I'm like, oh, I'm giving those players. Oh, well, I accepted it. It's what it is. You know what I mean? Like, so I think he and I are kind of in from the same cloth at that point to be like, I don't know. My memory is so short in some leagues where it's like, I do 100 trades a year. I can't keep track of them all. I do keep track of them all, but like in my head, I don't. You know what I mean? Like I just,
yes.
I don't know,
Also to Andrew's point, Shane is on so many different podcasts, and I'm sure he also just forgets what comes out of his mouth at a certain point. I mean, I've definitely said things on podcasts and later been like, oh, I totally forgot I said that. And then I like traded for a player I claimed to hate. And I was like, well, sorry, everyone. I will correct myself the next time I talk.
Oh, I've definitely gotten offers immediately, like Friday morning when the podcast posts. I'll start getting offers, and I'm like, I did say that, didn't I? I did say, like, doggone it. Like, they're calling me out. I like it. But no, I think that covers it. I think that's terrific. I really appreciate that, Pat. I know we had a lot of other questions, but we're going to kind of move along. This is what we do, and we've got a lot of trades to talk about in a way on our Find Me a Trade segment. So this week we have a roster submitted by Frank Roth at 8EEKID on Twitter. His league is the league that he's in, I should say, is the DTC Podcast Listener League. So I love, in my head, when I first saw this, I was like, well, wait a minute, that's brilliant, because this isn't a DTC podcast. We can offer advice here. Like, we can help out with this. Like, why not? We love the guys at Dynasty Trade Calculator, so we can help out with this. I will say I did not look at any of our trades on the DTC calculator. Like, no. Let's just go with the blind. I like it. But it is a 36-team, 3-division, 3-copy league. So it's one of those monster leagues where there's multiple things happening, and then I'm guessing they all play at the end. I love those kind of leagues. They're just so much fun. It is Superflex PPR and a 1.5 tight end premium, kind of what you were talking about, Bobby. And maybe not enough for your liking, but closer than most. It is a start 9, which I think is interesting. And start 9 means you're not starting as many as other leagues. I'm in some where you start 13, which is just insane. You're starting players that you're like, this has no business in my lineup, but it's bye weeks and I got nothing else. So start 9 is kind of interesting. So it's QB, 2 running back, 3 receiver, tight end flex, and that super flex we mentioned. So that super flex can obviously be that second quarterback. His team name is the @8EE Kid, and maybe there's something there I'm not seeing, like B Kid. You think it's like a B Kid? I don't know. But @B Kid True Truants, which is another fun name. I love this. And the notes he said where he got this team through a dispersal, he feels like he can compete, but feels like the wide receiver room can improve. He's got limited capital in draft thanks to trading for Jonathan Taylor. And I think even before we really get into the team, Bobby, I wanted your opinion on this. Like, if you're going into a draft or just leaving a draft, having given up all your picks for a stud, is that kind of what you like to do in a league like this before we even really get into the team? Is that something you tend to do?
Well, what's interesting is, I don't know if you guys did, but I took a look at his draft capital, and I don't really know what he was talking about because he actually still had a decent number of picks. And I was looking at some of those to make trades with. But to your general question, Andrew, not really. If you're coming into this fresh and you're not expecting to compete, my general rule of thumb, and I know I did say earlier, so I'm going to go a little against myself here, of being flexible and adaptable, is if you're not ready to compete, don't trade away the farm for running backs. That's just not my style. And if you're taking notes on me and you're in a league with me, you should know that I also generally just feel gross trading for running backs, even when I'm ready to compete. It's just not a position I like having on my dynasty rosters, to be honest, even though I recognize you need them to win. And most of my winning rosters have involved some really strong running backs. So I would much rather have the picks and try to build around those guys. But I've been accused sometimes of trying too hard, essentially, to build those dynasty rosters instead of just taking the points now. So that's essentially where I fall. But Jonathan Taylor is not the worst guy to go after if you're going to do that.
No. And let's run through the team real quick before we get, I'll let you go first on your trade there, Bobby. But so I do think he's a contender. I do agree with what he's saying. This team can compete. I don't think he's bottom of the barrel. I don't think he needs to scrap it. There are definitely some weak spots, and we'll get into that. But quarterbacks, he's got Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Ryan Tannehill. That's not a bad 3. And then you got the backups, Malik Willis, Kyle Trask, and Mason Rudolph. I don't think Rudolph plays, so he's probably somebody I'm cutting. But Trask and Willis backing up Brady and Tannehill, I mean, that's a solid QB core for a super flex league. I don't mind that. All a little older, but they're producing, and they're good quarterbacks. Nothing against it. Running backs, obviously, like I said, he's got Jonathan Taylor. He's got Aaron Jones. So, again, maybe the antithesis of what you were talking about with A.J. Dillon there before, Pat. Like, he's got the other guy, the declining asset. He's got James Robinson. Again, who knows what to think of that guy this year. Zach Moss, who is gone. We don't know what's going to happen with him. Drafted Dameon Pierce. He's got Ty Chandler, Giovanni Bernard, Amir Abdullah, Jamar Jefferson. Just nobody really flashy behind that. Receiver, I mean, again, I would say his best receiver is probably Tyler Lockett. I mean, again, just guessing at looking at this, he's got DeAndre Hopkins, MVS, which who knows? Tim Patrick could be a flyer. But yeah, he's right. His wide receiver room could use some work. I agree. But there's some players like Will Fuller could still show up somewhere and be something. Khalif Raymond might have a good week here and there, and you can trade him. I'm pretty much out on Robbie Anderson. I think that ship has sailed. I don't think there's really much left there. Tight end, he's got Hayden Hurst, Travis Kelce, Cade Otton, who he drafted, Brevin Jordan, and Donald Parham. So, again, tight end's pretty set with Kelce and Hurst as like a secondary. Even Brevin Jordan, I think, has some value going into dynasty leagues. But I guess let's start with your trade. Like I said, Bobby, what would you do if you had this team? If you were our listener and you're trying to find a trade, where would you start?
Sure. Well, first, I would be honest with myself, because one of the things I've learned in my time in Dynasty, and also from other people who I trust in Dynasty, and this is from our friend Leo at Siga FF, as well as Tacit Assassin 13, is just doing an honest assessment of your Dynasty roster. And I don't agree with the assessment that this is a contender. I think the wide receivers are too weak to really contend. And I don't see him being able to necessarily make those moves unless he does something like some of the trades, which I looked at all of ours just because I'm curious what you guys were suggesting. And so I do think what you would want to do here is essentially make a move to get a little bit younger while still essentially not rebuilding, but reloading is what I like to call it, where you're looking more at next year, but you'll still take your shot at this year. And so I sent in my trade, and this may not be the most realistic, I will say, because when I was making, to Pat's point earlier, when I was making this trade offer in my head to this other owner, I thought that they might balk at the price just given what's happened this offseason. But I was sending Aaron Rodgers to the team that was called the Fantasy Affliction for Derek Carr and Juju Smith-Schuster, I did check this on some calculators just to make sure I was within the ballpark. And it seemed like I was. A bunch of rankers still have Aaron Rodgers well ahead of Derek Carr. My concern would be that the other owner is so all in on Derek Carr getting Devontae Adams that it'd be like, why would I give you a Juju Smith-Schuster on top of Derek Carr to get to Aaron Rodgers? But from what I looked at from the Fantasy Afflictions roster, I feel like he is really an Aaron Rodgers type QB away from being a true champion contender. So he may look at that and say, you know what, Juju's had a few down seasons. They have Sky Moore there. They have Travis Kelce there. Maybe he'll be more of a tertiary piece. And so maybe he'll be willing to give Derek Carr there. But I will say I'm not fully confident that this trade would be accepted if it was offered to the other owner.
What do you think, Pat? Is he on the right page with where you're at?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing, I agree completely with Bobby that the move for this guy to make is to get younger for sure, in addition to maybe trying to improve wide receiver. I just wonder if the trade would go through, considering that Carr and Juju have both seen these big value boosts in the offseason. And, you know, the guy would then feel like maybe he was giving away the offseason windfall that he got.
Yeah, and I think, too, just to kind of put this into perspective, like we said, like, what does this team need? I always look when I'm looking at the other teams, and if I'm trading with someone, if they've got a lot of running backs, they're contending, or at least in their head, they're contending, right? So if you've got a lot of running backs on your roster, you in your head, you're like, I must be contending. That's not always true, but if I'm rebuilding, I'm sending running backs away. I don't want running backs on my roster if I'm rebuilding. If I'm a bad team, running backs fall off the cliff so fast. One injury, their value tanks. I need to insulate as much value as possible, and that's usually in the quarterback and receiver position for me and how I like to do it. And the Fantasy Affliction has what I would consider 4 starting running backs. Like, that's a solid running back team. They got Javonte Williams, Derrick Henry, Leonard Fournette, and Dalvin Cook. I mean, like, if that team's not going in this year, what are you doing? I mean, like, Javonte is obviously a stud, like, running back in the sense of, like, going to be around for a few years. But, I mean, you got Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, and Leonard Fournette, who all might be in the last year of their true value. So I totally love the idea. And I thought about trading with him, but I saw you put yours on there first, I think. I was like, well, I'll try to find another one because I don't want to do the same kind of thing. But again, I'm with you.
On the right track there, Andrew. I looked at their running backs and thought these guys could all lose value or not, maybe even not be relevant next year. So maybe they would trade for Rodgers just to go all in on
exactly
their chips in on this year. But
that's what I was going to say next. Like, if you've got that kind of running back room, I would feel like you know the clock is ticking, and you're like, it's this year. I'm pushing my chips in, and I do think Rodgers is better than Carr significantly. Even if this is his last year, and who knows what happens with that. But again, I just think that I think there's a lot of potential there. And Juju is still a wild card. I mean, a lot of people want to say he's going to be the best guy there, but we don't know that for sure. That offense could look very different this year than what we're used to seeing with Hill gone. I mean, it could filter all the way through Kelce, who our guy already has on his team. So it's like, do I want to add Juju? I don't mind it, of course. But this other guy, Fantasy Affliction, might be like, let me out on this Juju, right? I'm done. And it gets him an upgraded quarterback to pair with Kyler Murray, which, again, that's a solid 2 starters. Kyler Murray and Aaron Rodgers. No one's going to hate that. At least for
I
this year.
appreciate you advocating for my trade, although ultimately I do agree with Pat that I think the offseason hype will make it so that they probably don't accept. But I don't think I will say this. It is not a Scott's trade from last week. That's right,
No.
Scott. I'm calling you out live on air. Your trade was awful last week. My trade is not that.
He will have to defend that the next time he's on. But I do want to say, like, too, it's an interesting trade because it's similar to what you came up with, Pat. Maybe if you want to get into your trade, it's the same basic idea, just with a different team, if you want to get into that.
Yeah, so I think Frank has he should try to maybe get a little younger with this deal. In addition to getting in, like, he needs another piece at wide receiver. Like, I really like what he can throw out as the basic twosome at running back every week with Taylor and Jones. He's really solid at quarterback. He's got Travis Kelce at tight end. I mean, that looks like a championship roster until you get to the wide receiver position, and then it's pretty ugly, especially with the Hopkins suspension. Yeah, because there's one potential anchor guy that he's not going to have for a while. So he does need another anchor guy. And looking at some of the other rosters, I thought it was kind of hard for him to leverage his quarterback depth because it seems like the quarterbacks are really evenly dispersed in this league, which was weird. And it also seems like Normally you find one team with a big, they're the cartel of wide receivers, and we don't seem to have that kind of a team in this league. Like, there's no one sitting on a lot of wide receiver talent. So it was kind of hard to find a deal, but I think there's this other team. The team is just, I think, named for the owner. It's Damon Brooks. At Damon Brooks is the team name, and I would maybe offer him Aaron Rodgers. And I believe Damon Brooks has like a bunch of sort of young, unproven, like he's got a depth at quarterback, but not really frontline firepower. So trade him Aaron Rodgers and MVS, and get back in return Deontay Johnson and Jared Goff. So I guess that depends on whether, how you feel about Deontay Johnson. I mean, I don't feel like he's any less of an alpha receiver losing, a very over-the-hill Ben Roethlisberger and getting either Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett. But, it's a clear upgrade at wide receiver. He gets younger in the deal. As Bobby said, I think that should be one of his, I don't think he can quite go all in with this team. Right. This is not an all-in type of team, and Bobby was very, dead on about that. So at least this does give him a shot with his wide receivers, and he gets a little younger to boot.
No, I like it. And I think, too, to kind of add even some more context to what you were saying, Damon Brooks has Jared Goff, Daniel Jones, and Trey Lance. So he really doesn't have a QB1. I mean, you could argue Trey Lance, but that's a lot of speculative value at this point still with Jimmy Garoppolo on the team. It's like, we don't know. There's some reports coming out that he might not be everything we thought. And like, there's some question marks, right? In my QB1, I don't want question marks. Like, I don't prefer that. Like, I don't mind Watson being my QB1, but there's question marks, right? Rodgers, there's question marks, but he's going to play. I think he's going to be fine. The other thing then
to add,
go ahead.
Is just, I was thinking about this live to both Pat and I's trade, and I tried initially with another player to trade him, and I just couldn't find a trade that made sense. But this would be the logical next move, is if you trade Aaron Rodgers away and get younger, try to do the same thing with Travis Kelce and pick up another wide receiver that way by downgrading a tight end maybe, because Travis Kelce, as much as I love him and he's been my tight end one forever, although now that might be Mark Andrews, you're going to start seeing the Dynasty community get down on him just because of his age. So now may be the time to cash out, get a little bit younger with your team. You don't have to go too young, but we talked about him earlier even. If you can, I don't remember which team has Dalton Schultz, but if you could trade Kelce for Dalton Schultz plus a wide receiver that you like a bit, that could be a very solid move for this team.
Well,
and I just wanted to add it while I was thinking about it.
I don't mind the interruption on that. That's fine. I think the other thing I wanted to mention here, though, is just to kind of clarify, this guy also has Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. I mean, it's like maybe he would be okay to get rid of one or the other, right, if you have both. I also was going to say there is a chance that maybe you do Bobby's trade and you get Derek Carr, and then you trade this guy Derek Carr because he's got Devontae Adams. So sometimes people like to stack, right? So like sometimes you could think a couple steps ahead, and no trade is ever your last trade, hopefully. And this is a DTC listener league. Like they're going to be trading like trade addicts do. I mean, in my opinion. So I feel like you could, and that's also why I think a lot of teams I say can be contenders are really, all you have to be is in the top 8 out of 12, in my opinion, in May to be a contender. You have to be a couple of moves away from having your team be a contender, in my book, in May. We've got time. We've got some ways to make some moves. We've got some things that can happen, some things that can break your way. That number dwindles the closer you get to the season. And by week 3, there's really only 4 teams that are contending. So again, that wording is even a little bit vague on purpose. But I thought both of those trades were really well done and kind of did the job of what you're trying to do. You get back at Deontay kind of, and Goff is still a serviceable QB3. You know, like that's not a bad trade at all. I mean, again, I think you're both in the same wheelhouse. And I think mine is even, again, kind of similar in its own right, but different enough because, I saw you was trading Aaron Rodgers and I saw Pat's. I was like, well, okay, I'll go a different direction. So mine was going to be to send Tom Brady to Mac Attack for Devonta Smith. Now, straight up, I'm not sure this trade goes through, right? I don't know of a lot of teams that would just say smash accept to that, right? Devonta Smith, they just added A.J. Brown. He went from the wide receiver 1 to the wide receiver 2, but he's still really young, really talented, Heisman Trophy winner and all this, BMI, Twitter, and all this stuff, right? But I do think that some people are really looking at Brady and saying, like, he might be the guy. Like, he's never going to go away. He's going to play forever and all this, right? Well, this other guy, again, just looking at the teams, the player that I'm talking to here is Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, solid two quarterbacks. But after that, it's Davis Mills, who again, something, and Ben Roethlisberger, who's out of the league, Teddy Bridgewater. So again, this is one of those where like, if I'm Mac Attack, and actually Mac Attack is someone who I traded with in Trade Addicts 1. So it's like he and I are very similar in this regard. I'm not sure I would accept this trade either. So what I said is you might need to throw something else into this, right? Do Brady in a third or Brady in another piece to see if it sweetens the pot at all. It might not. There might not be a single way you can do it. So then I was like, well, I'm not sure this would work, but let me go a different direction entirely and be like, all right, let me pivot off. Because I do this sometimes too, where I attack a player that I don't want so that then they feel like I'm settling for someone else, but that's who I wanted the whole time. It's that 3D chess level of trading. So I would probably send that trade and start the talks there and be like, you know what? Yeah, that doesn't really make sense. So what if we did this? What if it was Brady and Hurst for Mills, Thielen, and Tony? And the logic here is kind of what we just talked about. Thielen, I think, is still going to be a good player. I think he's going to be in your starting lineup most weeks. I am not necessarily off of the Tony ride, but I'm not fully on board either. I think there is some potential for him in New York, but Brian Daboll's going to have to figure out how to use him. So again, and then adding Mills as your third QB, downgrading from Brady to Mills, is that a downgrade? Yes, but not much of one. So that was kind of where my head was at, is like try to do a couple different angles on this to see if I can send Brady, partially because I think you can be fine with a better or different third quarterback. You don't need Brady on that team. And I think if your team isn't contending, you want out on Brady now rather than waiting, right? If you're on the fence and this team is not a top 3 team, so it's like, well, that gives you some outs. It gets you younger. It gets you some options. What do you think about that one, Pat? Oh, muted.
Sorry about that. My dog was barking for a second.
No
I was
problem.
trying to stop him. So maybe this guy is a little bit down on Devonta Smith with the A.J. Brown acquisition and is willing to do that. And it's another deal that sort of solves the issue that Bobby and I were talking about. Maybe this guy tries to get younger just in case it doesn't work out with him going for it. But adds firepower, he gets younger. The only thing I do wonder is if his trading partner would be willing to give up a good young receiver to get like a great third quarterback,
right?
To really improve at a spot you're not necessarily going to be able to use. Yes, it's great insurance in case something happened, either Herbert or Burrow. But, maybe with those two, he's thinking like he can just pretty much get by with Davis Mills as his third guy, like his, start in 2 bye weeks or whatever. It all depends. Like that might be the one reason he'd be reluctant to make that deal. But in a vacuum, I think the value on that deal is totally fair.
Yeah, not to pile on, but that's exactly what I was thinking, is that if I were the other guy, I wouldn't make this trade to get my third QB because I have 2 strong QBs and I just don't feel the need to make that move. That's honestly how I felt about both deals that you came up with, Andrew. Is just I personally would not do that trade to get a third quarterback. I get where you're going with, and I totally get it. Like if I didn't have those 2 quarterbacks, I think, yeah, the second one especially does make some sense. But I do also think this highlights the difference of us as traders, where
exactly
maybe Pat and I put ourselves in the other person's shoes a bit more than you do and really think through, like, would I accept this if I was on the other side of it?
Well, and I want to jump in with this, though. This Mac Attack team is, in my opinion, the best team in the league, right? He's got Najee Harris, Antonio Gibson, Austin Eckler. We talked about Burrow and Herbert. He's got Joe Mixon. He's got Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, Antonio Brown, which is just hilarious to me. Devonta Smith, obviously, like I said, like he's and Mark Andrews is a tight end. Like this team, in my opinion, is the best team in the league. So again, I'm with you guys, and this is exactly where I wanted to talk about, because we had talked about the trading stuff earlier. Sometimes in my discussions and my trade negotiations with people, it's literally just like you said, a fishing expedition. And then what happens in a lot of these cases, if you send a Brady for Smith, they're like way off, or I'm out on Brady. It's like, that gives me info. Thank you. Now I can pivot and I'm like, all right, what about Tannehill instead? Right. And I can see where we go with it, because again, again, this is the difference in how we like to trade. I look at it like a starting point, and I know a lot of people, and Bosch kept hammering this home, where it's like, no, this is my best and final. I'm not negotiating all day. I got kids. We're going to Kings Island. I got a job. Like, I don't have time for this, and I'm sitting here like, I work from home. I got nothing to do. I really enjoy the trade talks. That's just how I work. So my thought is, again, on Find Me a Trade, I love to see a different angle. So I don't mind at all the disagreement. And I think that's where Scott and I are very similar in that regard too, where sometimes we make a trade for value and sometimes we make a trade for need. And it's like, everybody sees different holes in the team. I do think that, if I'm being honest, the was it Frank, right? Yeah, Frank's team does have a lot of holes at receiver, and I don't think one trade is going to make this team a contender fully. But what I'm saying is you can start to make some incremental things. You got to start working at the margins a little bit. And to me, working at the margins means I'm sending a low ball-ish offer to start with and seeing where I can find a hole. And I think that's where, if that's just my negotiation tactic, where it's like, where can I make a little advantage? Where can I get a little piece extra? Where can I get a little younger here and there and kind of grow this? And again, in a DTC listener league, like they're going to be making trades. Like this is not going to be a boring league. And I do think with a 36 team league, 3 divisions and all this, granted, you can only trade in your own division, I'm sure, right? There's no multiple copies or anything like that. But again, it's going to be one of those leagues that is very active, and it's going to have a lot of people that want to make trades and going to make moves. I will agree too, though, that if I was Mac Attack, I wouldn't make a move at all. I'd be like, no, I'm good. I'm right where I need to be. But I don't mind poking at that Jenga tower and just seeing if there's a weak spot. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe he's hesitant. He doesn't think Mills is the guy, or maybe he's like, well, if I'm contending, I need a third quarterback because I don't want to have Herbert get hurt or something. Like I need to have a better third. Like we play against people like this all the time where it's like,
to your
that's
point,
not how my
Andrew,
brain works, but
he might not want to find himself in the situation where one of his QBs goes down and then he has to make like a desperation trade. So it could work. And you did say something earlier that I really liked, by the way, and it's getting to your idea of snowballing, which is, and to be fair, I'm giving myself some credit here, but I'm also giving Pat some credit, which is I very much like the idea of doing the trade for Derek Carr if you can, and then turning around and then again snowballing and flipping that to the other owner for Jared Goff and getting back Deontay Johnson. So then you have Deontay Johnson and Juju, and you've downgraded from Aaron Rodgers to Jared Goff, but you have those other quarterbacks and you're planning for the future. And now you have 2 fairly young, good wide receivers on your team. So I definitely like that point of just because you made this one trade doesn't mean you can't turn around and then flip those additional pieces for other things. And I know I talk about you and Russ making trades just to make trades sometimes, but that is an advantage of what you can do is you can continually snowball trades into bigger and better things or things that make more sense for your team. If you're a very active trader, it's not a style for everybody, but it does work for some.
Well, and that's where Scott is portfolio dynasty, right? He's got 45 teams or something crazy, and he's always trying to make sure he's got a certain amount of shares of players, and it's a whole different kind of game, right? And mine is sort of the same thing, like especially in the off season or the non-point scoring season, as Russ would call it. Like I don't need to worry about my lineup at all. Just give me a little more value. Like let me see where I can get working at the margins and trimming a little bit and adding a little bit here and there. That's what I'm trying to do right now. I'm not trying to really worry about my lineup. Now, granted, that's not to say the other teams in the league aren't. Like, other teams are looking at their lineup and going, I'm set. I don't need to make a trade in this league. And that's perfectly fine. But especially if I'm in the middle or in the bottom half and looking to try to contend and make some moves, I have to put in the work to do that. I'm not just going to get inbox emails and say like, oh, this is my trade now, I'm going to do it. Like you got to put in the effort. And I think sometimes maybe that gets lost in this whole thing. Like it is nice to have a great team and to kind of, to win the whole thing and to build a team that is, great for years. It rarely happens by luck. It almost always happens by, picking the right players and making the right choices and all this. But it's the grind. It's the working it. It's the, paying attention to the rookie draft and making trades when player values change and like paying attention to all those little things about not only scarcity, but like positional value in general. And like, looking at the lineups in March doesn't really matter to me. I just want to add value to my team. And so I think that's, again, where there's no wrong way to do this. And one of my favorite things that I've always liked about this segment is that it gives Frank, in this case, a starting point. Frank may hate all of these, but he goes, you know what? I never thought of that. That guy does have this weak spot, and I really don't like Kelsey. I'm out on Kelsey. So like it just opens the door to some conversation to help, but also anyone else that has players like this or is looking to make a move like this, or like you said, Bobby, that is doing an honest evaluation of their team and is like, you know what? I am kind of in the middle. Maybe this is the time for me to blow it up. And they were mentioning trades like this. So that's what I think is helpful here. I mean, I don't think any of these trades, I'm going to say mine, any of my trades, I would be shocked if they get accepted because that's not how I build a trade. You know what I mean? Like, that's just not how I do this. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of value in every possible way to do this. Every league is so unique. You could take from this whatever you need. So I love this. And I think we all did a pretty good job. I'll say that I did the worst. That's fine. I don't mind. It's not Scott this week. I'll take it. But there's no negative value in these kind of discussions. That's the whole point. We're all here to have fun and to talk trades. And so I'm always up for that. This is a starting point, not an end. But with that said, we've gotten through the Find Me a Trade. We've gotten through some great Dynasty talk. Whew. It's been an hour and a half already. I can't believe it. This has been the fastest hour and a half of my week. But Pat, recap again. Where can people find you, and what do you got going on the next couple of weeks here as we lead up into the offseason?
Yeah, they can find me on Twitter at Fitz_FF. They can find the Fitz on Fantasy podcast in the Fantasy Pros Dynasty podcast, and just basically continuing to crank out stuff at Fantasy Pros, keep those rankings all spruced up, I guess. And, as you know, Andrew, we're going to be coming out with a redraft kit for our customers. That's going to be out in June. So working diligently on that, I guess. It seems like the off season now, but we are going to be in the heart of draft season before we know it.
Yeah, August flies into here, man. I tell you what, every year in Dynasty, I feel like it gets shorter and shorter, but that's a good thing in a way, right? We get real football quicker, I guess.
Exactly. We hit the start of June, and it seems like the preseason, like the June and July are the fastest months. Yeah. No question about it.
Well, there's all the, like every day there's new blurbs about some coach saying something about some player and the values go all over the place.
And that's when you make a trade offer to Shane Manila.
I was just going to say that. That's when you send trades to Shane and see what he's doing. Yeah, exactly. Perfectly put, Bobby. Well, thank you again so much for coming on, Pat. Really great talking to you. I know it's good to hear your voice. I know you and I email a lot with Fantasy Pros, so it's nice to have a conversation like two real people for a minute. But no, I appreciate you coming on. It was a good time.
Yeah, great to talk to you in person, Andrew, for a change. And Bobby, it's about time we did a podcast together. So it was really great being on with both you guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, Pat. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, so we'll get out of here with this. So we obviously follow us on Twitter at Dynasty Junkies. Make sure you give us a rate and review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. We do need some more Find Me a Trades. We've got some lined up, obviously, and we always take new submissions. I mean, obviously, there are some leagues that get a little stale that have been on there a while, and we're like, well, we'll go back later, and we never really do for whatever reason. So if you want to come back and resubmit, you can always submit more than one team. You can submit your teams more than once. We'll catch them in the forum, not a problem. But obviously, follow me on Twitter, too, at Andrew Hall FF. We've got Bobby Koch at Rekt Fantasy, REKED Fantasy. Make sure you subscribe to the DAP Network, too, at DAP_network. You can catch us live on YouTube like you're doing now if you're watching here. We had a couple people in the chat, Joey and Kyle. Thanks for showing up. Make sure, like I said, again, though, rate and review us. We do really want to see those. If you have some feedback like Bobby had on the first episode of Dynasty Junkies, we're open to it, right? Who knows? Maybe in a year or two, you'll be on the podcast. I mean, what a trajectory. That's just amazing. Before we disconnect, too, I do want to re-mention, too, that we are giving away a Scott Fishbowl. Like we mentioned before, we're giving away a spot. Make sure you're signed up for Scott Fishbowl and then find our tweet on Twitter. Obviously, where else would it be? But find that tweet with Rocky's League where you can actually do what we just did and find a trade in that league. We'll talk about some of the ones we like next week, and we'll pick a winner. And maybe you can get in Scott Fishbowl and show us how you're much better than all of us and how we're all idiots and none of us are experts. That's my favorite part of this. But with that, anything you want to say, Bobby, before you take us out of here?
No, it's been great to podcast with both of you. I am looking forward to becoming a rotational co-host of this show and working with both yourself and Rocky and Scott, although I'm starting to believe that Scott doesn't exist because every time I'm supposed to podcast with him, he has to wash his hair or something. But maybe one day Scott and I will actually podcast together.
Do you ever have that happen with Bogman, Pat? I got to ask, is Bogman one of those guys that you're just like, does he actually exist? I don't even know anymore.
He does. No, he's
busy. He's got a lot going on.
He does, man, definitely. And I know he's got weird hours. He's like a vampire. He's, up until late into the evening. And then, the sun comes up and he goes to sleep, I think. So,
God bless him. Yeah. Well, with your Scott and from our Scott and from all of us at Dynasty Junkies, I'll say it here. Junkies out.